The vast expanse of space stretched endlessly before the small shuttle as it approached the massive alien space station. The station, a jagged structure made of dark metal and glowing blue panels, loomed like a predator waiting to strike. Inside the shuttle, Daniel Carter sat quietly, his hands resting on his knees. His suit was immaculate, every crease pressed to perfection. It wasn't just any suit. It was tailored specifically for him, designed to project an image of calm authority. But beneath its surface lay secrets that even those closest to him didn't fully understand. Beside him, Rachel Monroe adjusted her earpiece, her fingers moving quickly over the controls of her tablet. She glanced at Daniel from time to time, her expression a mix of admiration and unease. Rachel had worked with Daniel for years, accompanying him on countless diplomatic missions across the galaxy. She knew how sharp his mind was, how he could turn even the most hostile negotiations into opportunities for peace. But this mission felt different. Something about the Krillians, the species they were meeting, made her stomach churn. "They're watching us," Rachel said finally, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft but carried a note of urgency. "I've been picking up encrypted signals since we entered their territory. They're tracking our every move." Daniel nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the viewport. "Let them watch," he replied, his tone calm but firm. "If they wanted to attack outright, they would have done so already. This is posturing, nothing more." Rachel frowned but didn't argue. She trusted Daniel implicitly, but that didn't stop her from worrying. The Krillians weren't known for subtlety or restraint. Their empire had expanded through brute force, crushing anyone who stood in their way. Humanity had managed to avoid direct conflict with them until now, but tensions were rising. Earth's leaders hoped this meeting would pave the way for peace, or at least prevent all-out war. As the shuttle docked with the station, a shiver ran down Rachel's spine. The airlock hissed open, revealing a group of Krillian soldiers standing, in formation. Their armor gleamed menacingly under the harsh artificial light, and their weapons were pointed directly at the shuttle. Daniel rose smoothly to his feet, straightening his tie as if preparing for a business meeting rather than stepping into what might be a deadly trap. "Stay close," he murmured to Rachel as they stepped out of the shuttle. His voice was steady, betraying none of the tension that must have been building inside him. Rachel followed obediently, clutching her tablet like a lifeline. The Krillians towered over them, their reptilian features twisted into expressions of disdain. Their leader, Commander Vrax, stepped forward, his scales glinting with an almost metallic sheen. His eyes locked onto Daniel, studying him with obvious contempt. "You are late," Vrax growled, his voice low and guttural. "We arrived precisely when we said we would," Daniel responded evenly, meeting Vrax's gaze without flinching. "Your hospitality leaves much to be desired, though," Vrax sneered, baring rows of razor-sharp teeth. "Humans think themselves clever, weaklings hiding behind words instead of strength." He gestured sharply with one clawed hand, signaling his soldiers to escort Daniel and Rachel deeper into the station. Rachel shot Daniel a worried glance, but he gave no outward sign of concern. To anyone else, he might have seemed completely at ease. But Rachel knew better. She'd seen glimpses of the man beneath the polished exterior. The man who could dismantle an opponent with a single sentence or take down multiple assailants in seconds. That side of Daniel rarely showed itself, but when it did, people tended to remember. The corridors of the station were cold and sterile, lined with blinking control panels and humming machinery. Krillian guards marched alongside them, their weapons ready. Every step echoed loudly in the oppressive silence. Rachel kept her head down, trying not to draw attention to herself while Daniel walked with purpose, his presence commanding despite the odds stacked against them. Finally, they reached the negotiation chamber, a large circular room dominated by a long table surrounded by chairs. Holographic displays hovered above the table, showing maps and data related to the disputed territories between Earth and the Krillians. Vrax took his seat at the head of the table, motioning for Daniel and Rachel to sit opposite him. "This will be brief," Vrax declared, folding his arms across his chest. "You humans claim innocence, yet your ships trespass on our borders. Explain yourselves." Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, crossing one leg over the other. He appeared relaxed, but his mind was racing. He needed to tread carefully. Here. One wrong word could escalate the situation beyond repair. Our vessels operate within neutral zones agreed upon during previous treaties, he began, his voice measured and clear. If there have been misunderstandings, we are willing to address them openly and honestly. Vrax snorted derisively. Words mean nothing. Action speaks louder. Your kind talks too much and does too little. Rachel glanced nervously at Daniel, sensing the growing hostility in the room. She tapped discreetly at her tablet, attempting to analyze the encrypted transmissions she'd detected earlier. If her suspicions were correct, this meeting wasn't about negotiation at all. It was a setup, a trap designed to eliminate Earth's envoy and justify further aggression against humanity. Daniel noticed her subtle movements and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. He understood what she was doing and why. Trusting her instincts was part of what made their partnership so effective. Still, he couldn't afford to let his guard down. Not here. Not now. For several minutes, the conversation continued, each exchange growing tenser than the last. Vrax grew increasingly agitated, his tail lashing behind him like a whip. Daniel remained composed, deflecting insults and accusations with practiced ease. But Rachel could see the storm brewing beneath. The surface. The Krillians weren't interested in diplomacy. They never had been. And then, without warning, everything changed. A sudden burst of static filled the room, cutting off communication systems. Lights flickered, plunging the chamber into semi-darkness. Before either Daniel or Rachel could react, the doors slammed shut, sealing them inside. Heavy footsteps echoed outside, accompanied by the unmistakable sound of weapons being drawn. "They're going to kill us," Rachel whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Daniel replied, his tone firm. "They're going to regret ever laying a hand on us." In that moment, something shifted in Daniel's demeanor. The diplomat vanished, replaced by someone far more dangerous. His eyes hardened, and his posture became predatory. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The Krillians had no idea who or what they were dealing with. The negotiation chamber, once tense but controlled, now felt like a pressure cooker ready to explode. The flickering lights cast eerie shadows across the room, making the Krillian soldiers standing guard seem even more menacing. Commander Vrax sat at the head of the table, his reptilian eyes gleaming with malice. He leaned forward, resting his clawed hands on the surface as if preparing to pounce. "You humans think you can deceive us," Vrax growled, his voice dripping with venom. "Your ships trespass, your leaders lie, and now, your so-called diplomat comes here to waste my time." Daniel Carter didn't flinch. His calm demeanor remained intact, though Rachel could see the subtle tightening of his jaw, a sign that he was calculating every word before speaking. "If there's been a misunderstanding, we're here to resolve it," Daniel replied, his tone steady and professional. "But accusations without evidence won't lead to progress." Vrax slammed his fist onto the table, causing the holographic displays above it to waver. "Enough," he roared. "You speak of resolution, while your fleets creep closer to our borders. Do not insult me with your lies." Rachel shifted uncomfortably in her seat, clutching her tablet tightly. She had finished analyzing the encrypted transmissions she'd intercepted earlier and confirmed her worst fears. This meeting was never intended to be peaceful. The Krillians had planned an ambush from the start, using the pretense of negotiations to lure Daniel into a trap. Her heart pounded as she glanced at Daniel, wondering how much longer they could keep up the charade. "Commander," Daniel said, leaning slightly forward, his voice carrying an edge of authority. "I assure you, humanity has no interest in conflict. If you have grievances, name them. Let's address them together." Vrax sneered, baring his sharp teeth. "Address them? No, you will answer for them." He gestured sharply to the guards stationed around the room. Two of them stepped forward, their weapons trained directly on Daniel and Rachel. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She instinctively moved closer to Daniel, her mind racing. "This is a mistake," she said, trying to sound confident despite the fear bubbling inside her. "If you harm us, Earth will know. They'll retaliate." Vrax laughed, a deep guttural sound that sent chills down Rachel's spine. "Earth will know nothing. By the time your pathetic leaders realize what has happened, you will already be dead." Daniel placed a hand gently on Rachel's arm, silently, signaling her to stay calm. His touch was reassuring, though his expression remained unreadable. To anyone else, he might have appeared resigned to his fate. But Rachel knew better. Beneath the surface, Daniel was assessing the situation, planning his next move. The tension in the room reached a breaking point when one of the guards stepped closer, his weapon aimed squarely at Daniel's chest. "Stand up," the guard ordered, his voice cold and mechanical. For a moment, Daniel didn't move. Then slowly and deliberately he rose to his feet, keeping his hands visible. Rachel followed suit, her legs trembling beneath her. She gripped her tablet tightly, unsure whether to use it as a tool or a weapon if things escalated further. "You've made a grave error," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. There was no anger in his tone, only certainty. "Attacking Earth's representative won't bring you peace. It will bring you war." Vrax tilted his head, studying Daniel with renewed interest. For a brief moment, doubt flickered in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by arrogance. "Words are meaningless," he spat. "Actions matter. And today, you act weak." That was when everything changed. Before anyone could react, Daniel's demeanor shifted. The polished diplomat vanished, replaced by someone far more dangerous. His posture straightened, his shoulders squared, and his eyes hardened into something cold and unyielding. Without warning, he activated a hidden mechanism in his suit. A soft hum filled the air as energy shields flared to life around him and Rachel, forming a protective barrier between them and the Krillians. Shouts erupted in the chamber as the guards opened fire, their weapons discharging bright bursts of energy. But the blasts ricocheted harmlessly off the shields, leaving Daniel and Rachel unharmed. Rachel gasped, her eyes wide with shock. She had known Daniel was resourceful, but this went beyond anything she'd imagined. "What is this sorcery?" Vrax demanded, rising to his feet. His tail lashed behind him, betraying his growing unease. "No sorcery," Daniel replied, his voice calm but laced with steel. "Just preparation." In one fluid motion, he deactivated the shield long enough to disarm the nearest guard. His movements were precise and efficient, enhanced by the advanced technology embedded in his suit. The guard stumbled back, weaponless, as Daniel turned his attention to the others. Rachel watched in awe as Daniel dismantled the attackers one by one. His training was evident in every step. He blocked a strike from one soldier, twisted his arm, and used his momentum to send him crashing into another. A third guard lunged at him, but Daniel sidestepped effortlessly, delivering a swift kick that sent the alien sprawling to the ground. Vrax roared in fury, drawing a blade from his belt. He charged at Daniel, his claws extended and teeth bared. But Daniel was ready. He ducked under Vrax's swing, grabbing the commander's wrist and twisting it until the blade clattered to the floor. With a powerful shove, he sent Vrax stumbling backward, his arrogance replaced by fear. Rachel, still protected by the energy shield, scrambled to pick up one of the discarded weapons. Though she wasn't trained for combat, she knew she had to do something to help. She aimed the weapon at the remaining guards, her hands shaking but determined. "Stay back!" she shouted, her voice stronger than she expected. The guards hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Their leader was incapacitated, and their target, supposedly a harmless diplomat, had just proven himself to be far more formidable than anyone anticipated. The room fell silent except for the heavy breathing of those still standing. Daniel surveyed the scene, his chest rising and falling steadily. His suit's energy reserves were depleted from maintaining the shield, but he didn't need it anymore. The immediate threat had been neutralized. Slowly, he turned to face Vrax, who was struggling to regain his footing. "This doesn't have to end in bloodshed," Daniel said, his tone measured but firm. "Call off your men, and we can still walk away from this." Vrax glared at him, hatred burning in his eyes. But he said nothing. Instead, he gave a curt nod to his surviving guards, signaling them to stand down. The Krillians backed away reluctantly, their weapons lowered but their expressions filled with resentment. Rachel exhaled a shaky breath, lowering the weapon she'd been holding. She looked at Daniel, her admiration mingling with disbelief. You planned for this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel shook his head. "Not exactly. I prepared for the possibility. Trust me, Rachel. When you represent Earth in hostile territory, it's better to expect the worst." As the adrenaline began to fade, Rachel realized the gravity of what had just happened. They weren't safe yet. The Krillians could regroup and launch another attack at any moment. But for now, they had survived. And Daniel had proven himself to be far more than a diplomat. He was a protector, a fighter, someone willing to do whatever it took to ensure humanity's survival, even if it meant revealing the deadly skills he usually kept hidden beneath his calm exterior. With the immediate danger over, Daniel turned his attention to the next challenge, escaping the station alive. The negotiation chamber, once a tense but formal setting, now looked like the aftermath of a battlefield. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and scorch marks from energy blasts marred the walls. The Krillian guards, who had moments ago been confident and aggressive, now stood at a distance, their weapons lowered but their eyes filled with unease. Commander Vrax sat slumped in his chair, nursing a bruised wrist and glaring daggers at Daniel Carter. Daniel stood calmly in the center of the room, his suit slightly disheveled but still functional. Rachel Monroe clutched her tablet tightly, her knuckles white as she tried to steady her breathing. Though the immediate threat had passed, both of them knew they were far from safe. This was enemy territory, and reinforcements could arrive at any moment. "We need to leave. Now," Daniel said, his voice low but urgent. He glanced at Rachel, his expression unreadable but his tone firm. "Can you access the station's map? Find us a route to the docking bay." Rachel nodded quickly, her fingers flying over the screen of her tablet. She pulled up the station's layout, her eyes scanning for the fastest way out. "There's a service corridor behind the chamber," she said after a moment. "It leads directly to the main hallway. From there, we can reach the shuttle." "Good," Daniel replied. He turned to face Vrax, who was still glaring at him with barely contained fury. "Commander, consider this your one chance to avoid further bloodshed. Let us go, or you'll regret it." Vrax bared his teeth, his tail lashing angrily behind him. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "This station is mine. My warriors will hunt you down. You won't make it out alive." Daniel didn't respond. Instead, he gave Vrax a cold, hard stare, one that conveyed more than words ever could. Then, without another glance at the defeated commander, he motioned for Rachel to follow him. Together, they moved toward the door leading to the service corridor. As they stepped into the dimly lit passageway, Rachel couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The narrow corridor was lined with exposed wires and humming machinery, its walls vibrating faintly from the station's core systems. Every step echoed loudly, making it impossible to move quietly. She glanced back at Daniel, who walked with purpose, his posture alert and ready for anything. "What if they're waiting for us?" Rachel whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "They probably are," Daniel admitted, his tone calm but direct. "But we have the advantage right now. They don't know what I'm capable of. We use that to our advantage." Rachel swallowed hard, trying to push down her fear. She trusted Daniel. He had proven himself more than capable, but the odds were stacked against them. The Krillians outnumbered them, and they were on home turf. Even with Daniel's skills and technology, escaping wouldn't be easy. They reached the end of the corridor and paused before stepping into the main hallway. Daniel leaned forward slightly, peering around the corner. Two Krillian soldiers stood, guard near an intersection, their weapons drawn and their armored forms blocking the path. Daniel held up a hand, signaling Rachel to stay back while he formulated a plan. "You distract them," he murmured. "I'll take care of the rest." Rachel's eyes widened in alarm. "Distract them how?" "Just do something unexpected," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "Make noise. shout. Anything to draw their attention away from me. Before Rachel could protest, Daniel slipped into the shadows, disappearing from sight. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what she had to do. Then, gripping her tablet like a shield, she stepped into the hallway and shouted as loudly as she could. "Hey, over here!" Her voice echoed through the corridor, startling the two guards. They turned toward her, their weapons raised, and began advancing cautiously. Rachel backed away slowly, her heart pounding. She didn't dare look behind her, focusing instead on keeping the guards' attention fixed on her. Just as they were about to close in, a blur of movement caught her eye. Daniel appeared seemingly out of nowhere, moving with speed and precision. He tackled one of the guards, disarming him in seconds, while simultaneously disabling the other with a swift strike to the neck. Rachel let out a shaky breath as the two Krillians collapsed to the ground, unconscious but alive. Daniel grabbed one of their weapons and handed it to her. "Here, take this. You might need it." Rachel hesitated, staring at the weapon in her hands. She wasn't trained for combat, but she understood the necessity. Nodding silently, she followed Daniel as they continued down the hallway, their pace quickening with each passing second. The station's interior grew darker and more labyrinthine as they ventured deeper, the artificial lights flickering intermittently. Alarms blared in the distance, growing louder with every step. It was clear the Krillians were mobilizing, searching for the intruders who had dared to defy them. "We're running out of time," Daniel muttered under his breath. He glanced at Rachel, noticing the tension etched onto her face. "Stay close, don't fall behind." "I'm not planning to," Rachel replied, forcing herself to match his pace despite the fear coursing through her veins. She clutched the stolen weapon tightly, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if they got cornered? What if reinforcements arrived before they reached the shuttle? She shook her head, pushing those thoughts aside. Focusing on survival was the only option. They rounded another corner and found themselves face to face with a group of civilians, human hostages being held by Krillian guards. Rachel gasped, her heart sinking at the sight. The hostages, dressed in simple clothing and looking exhausted, were huddled together, their faces pale with fear. One of the captives, a young man with messy brown hair and glasses, met Rachel's gaze, his eyes pleading for help. Daniel froze momentarily, assessing the situation. There were 4 guards, heavily armed and clearly on edge. Freeing the hostages would slow them down, putting everyone at greater risk. But abandoning them wasn't an option either. "We can't leave them," Rachel whispered urgently, reading Daniel's hesitation. "We have to help." Daniel exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. He knew she was right. Leaving the hostages behind would weigh on both of them forever. "Fine," he said finally. "But we do this smartly. No heroics." He signaled for Rachel to stay back while he approached the guards, his movements deliberate and calculated. Pretending to surrender, he raised his hands and called out, "Hold your fire, I'm unarmed." The Krillians exchanged wary glances, unsure whether to trust him. One of the guards stepped forward, his weapon aimed squarely at Daniel's chest. "What do you want?" the guard demanded, his voice gruff. "To negotiate," Daniel replied smoothly, his tone calm and non-threatening. "Your commander made a mistake attacking us. Let these people go and we'll walk away peacefully." The guard laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "You're in no position to bargain, human." Daniel's expression remained neutral, but his eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you sure about that?" In one fluid motion, he activated a hidden feature in his suit, a small pulse emitter embedded in his sleeve. A burst of electromagnetic energy surged outward, temporarily disabling the guards' weapons and sending them stumbling backward. Seizing the opportunity, Daniel lunged forward, disarming the nearest guard and using his own weapon against him. Within seconds, all 4 guards were incapacitated, lying unconscious on the floor. The hostages stared at him in stunned silence, unsure whether to cheer or run. Daniel turned to them, his voice firm but reassuring. "You're safe now. Follow us and stay close, we're getting out of here." The young man with glasses stepped forward, his hands trembling but his voice surprisingly steady. "Thank you," he said. My name's Ethan Cole. If there's anything I can do to help, just say the word. Daniel nodded briefly, impressed by Ethan's composure. Stick with us and try not to slow us down. With the hostages in tow, the group pressed onward, navigating the twisting corridors of the station. The alarms grew louder, and the hum of approaching footsteps echoed through the halls. They were running out of time. As they neared the docking bay, Rachel spotted a control panel next to a large blast door. "That must open the way to the shuttle," she said, pointing to the panel. "But it's locked. I'll need a minute to hack it." "Do it fast," Daniel urged, taking up a defensive position as Rachel worked. Behind them, the sound of boots pounding against metal signaled the arrival of reinforcements. The Krillians were closing in. Rachel's fingers flew over the panel, her concentration absolute. Sweat dripped down her forehead as she bypassed security protocols one by one. Finally, with a soft beep, the blast door slid open, revealing the docking bay beyond. "Go!" Daniel shouted, ushering the group inside. He stayed behind, holding off the pursuing Krillians with precise bursts of energy from his weapon. When the last of the hostages had crossed the threshold, he sprinted after them, diving through the doorway just as the Krillians opened fire. The shuttle sat waiting on the platform, its engines already warming up. Ethan rushed to the controls, his hands moving with surprising skill. "I used to work maintenance on ships like this," he explained, his voice tinged with nervous excitement. "I can get us out of here." "Then do it," Daniel ordered, taking a seat near the viewport. He kept his weapon ready, watching as the Krillians poured into the docking bay, their weapons blazing. The shuttle rocked slightly as energy blasts struck its hull, but Ethan managed to lift off just in time, accelerating toward the station's exit. The shuttle soared through the cold expanse of space, its engines humming steadily as it put distance between itself and the Krillian station. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but quiet. The hostages sat huddled together, their faces pale with exhaustion and fear. Rachel Monroe leaned against the wall, her hand still gripping the weapon Daniel had given her. Though they were safe for now, the adrenaline hadn't fully left her system. Her mind replayed the events of the past hour, the ambush, the fight, the narrow escape, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't out of danger yet. Daniel Carter sat near the front of the shuttle, his gaze fixed on the viewport. Stars stretched endlessly before them, their light glinting faintly off his suit. To anyone else, he might have appeared calm, even relaxed. But Rachel knew better. His posture was rigid, his jaw tight, and his eyes darted occasionally toward the radar display. He wasn't just watching the stars. He was waiting, anticipating what might come next. Ethan Cole, the young man who had helped them free the hostages, piloted the shuttle with surprising skill. His fingers moved quickly over the controls, adjusting the trajectory and speed to ensure they stayed ahead of any potential pursuit. "How are you holding up?" Ethan asked, glancing back at Rachel and Daniel. His voice was steady, though there was a slight tremor beneath it. "I've been better," Rachel admitted, forcing a weak smile. She looked at Daniel, hoping for some reassurance, but he remained silent, his focus unwavering. She sighed softly and turned her attention to the hostages. Most of them were civilians, scientists, engineers, and technicians who had been captured during earlier skirmishes with the Krillians. They were scared, confused, and clearly in need of support. "Is everyone okay?" Rachel asked, standing up and moving toward the group. Her tone was gentle, trying to offer comfort despite the chaos around them. A few nodded weakly while others simply stared at her, too overwhelmed to respond. One woman, her face streaked with tears, reached out and grabbed Rachel's hand. "Thank you," the woman whispered, her voice trembling. We thought we'd never get out." Rachel squeezed her hand gently. "You're safe now, just try to stay calm, we'll figure this out." As she spoke, the shuttle rocked slightly, jolting everyone inside. Ethan cursed under his breath, his hands flying over the controls. "They're firing at us," he shouted, his voice rising with urgency. On the radar display, several blips appeared behind them, closing in fast. The Krillians weren't letting them go without a fight. Daniel rose to his feet, his movements deliberate and controlled. Ethan, keep us moving. Rachel, help the hostages secure themselves. We don't need anyone getting hurt if things get rough. Rachel nodded and immediately began helping the civilians strap into their seats. Some of them cooperated quickly, while others struggled, their hands shaking too much to manage the buckles. She worked patiently, murmuring words of encouragement, until everyone was safely secured. Meanwhile, Daniel moved to the rear of the shuttle, where a small arsenal of weapons had been stored. He selected a compact energy rifle and checked its charge, his expression grim. They're gaining on us, Ethan called out, his voice strained. Their ships are faster than ours. If we don't do something, they'll catch us in minutes. Daniel glanced at the radar display, calculating their options. The Krillian ships were indeed faster, and their firepower was far superior. Outrunning them wasn't an option. They needed another plan. His eyes narrowed as he studied the layout of the nearby region of space. There was a cluster of asteroids not far from their current position. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to level the playing field. Head for the asteroid field, Daniel instructed, his voice firm. Use the rocks as cover. We'll try to lose them in there. Ethan hesitated for a moment, unsure if that was the best idea. Flying through an asteroid field was risky, especially with a damaged shuttle. But the alternative, being caught by the Krillians, was far worse. Got it, he replied, adjusting the controls. The shuttle veered sharply, heading toward the dense cluster of floating debris. As they approached the asteroid field, the Krillian ships followed closely, their weapons blazing. Energy blasts streaked past the shuttle, narrowly missing its hull. Alarms blared inside the cabin, warning of critical damage to the shields. Ethan gritted his teeth, weaving the shuttle through the jagged rocks with expert precision. The passengers screamed as the ship jolted violently, dodging one asteroid after another. We can't keep this up forever, Ethan shouted, his voice tinged with panic. The shields won't hold much longer. Daniel moved to the co-pilot's seat, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Keep going, he said, his tone calm but commanding. I'll handle the rest. He activated the shuttle's external turrets, taking manual control of the weapons. Through the viewport, he could see flashes of light as the Krillian ships fired relentlessly. With practiced aim, he returned fire, targeting their engines and weapon systems. One of the enemy ships exploded in a brilliant burst of flames, its wreckage scattering across the void. Another ship veered off course, its hull breached by Daniel's precise shots. But the remaining ships pressed on, undeterred. Their pilots were skilled, maneuvering through the asteroid field with ease. Daniel knew they couldn't win a direct confrontation, not with their limited resources. They needed to think smarter. Ethan, take us deeper into the field, Daniel ordered. Find a spot where the rocks are thickest. We'll use them to mask our trail. Ethan nodded, pushing the shuttle further into the chaotic maze of asteroids. The ship rocked violently as it skimmed past massive boulders, some of which were larger than the shuttle itself. Behind them, the Krillian ships struggled to keep up, their larger frames making navigation more difficult. One of the ships collided with an asteroid, sending shards of metal spiraling into space. We're losing them, Ethan exclaimed, his voice filled with cautious optimism. He guided the shuttle into a narrow crevice between two massive rocks, effectively hiding it from view. The engines powered down to minimal levels, reducing their heat signature and making them harder to detect. Inside the shuttle, the passengers held their breath, listening intently for any sign of pursuit. The only sounds were the faint hum of the engines and the occasional creak of the ship's frame. Rachel moved to the viewport, peering out cautiously. The Krillian ships lingered nearby, scanning the area with searchlights. For several tense minutes they hovered uncertainly before finally retreating, their presence fading into the distance. They're gone, Rachel whispered, relief washing over her. She turned to Daniel, who was still seated at the controls, his shoulders relaxing slightly. We lost them. For now, Daniel replied, his tone measured. But they'll regroup and come after us again. We need to reach Earth as quickly as possible. Ethan exhaled deeply, his hands trembling as he released the controls. That was insane. I didn't think we'd make it. You did well, Daniel said, giving him a rare nod of approval. We wouldn't have made it without you. Rachel smiled faintly, grateful for the brief moment of calm. But she knew. Daniel was right. The Krillians wouldn't stop hunting them. And when they found them again, they would be ready. Until then, they had to stay alert, stay prepared, and hope they could reach safety before the storm hit once more. As the shuttle drifted silently through the shadow of the asteroids, the passengers began to relax, their fear slowly giving way to gratitude. They owed their lives to Daniel and Rachel, and to Ethan, whose quick thinking had saved them all. But none of them could forget the look in Daniel's eyes during the fight. It was a look of someone who had seen death and dealt it out in equal measure, for now they were alive, but the war was far from over. The shuttle drifted quietly through the shadow of the asteroids, its engines humming softly as Ethan kept it hidden from view. The passengers sat in silence, their faces pale but relieved. For now they were safe. But the tension in the air was palpable. Everyone knew the Krillians would return eventually, and when they did, the fight might not end so favorably. Rachel Monroe moved to check on the hostages again, her movements deliberate but gentle. Many of them had fallen asleep, exhausted from the ordeal, while others stared blankly out the viewport, their minds still processing what had happened. She knelt beside the woman who had thanked her earlier, offering a reassuring smile. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. The woman nodded weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm okay. Just tired. Thank you for saving us." Rachel patted her hand gently. "We're all in this together. Just rest. We'll get you home soon." As Rachel stood up, she glanced at Daniel Carter, who was seated near the controls. His suit was slightly torn from the earlier skirmish, but he showed no signs of fatigue. His eyes were fixed on the radar display, scanning for any sign of pursuit. Despite his calm demeanor, Rachel could sense the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. Every decision he made, from freeing the hostages to navigating the asteroid field, had been calculated, precise, and necessary. But none of those decisions came without cost. Ethan Cole leaned back in the pilot's seat, letting out a shaky breath. His hands were still trembling slightly, though he tried to hide it by gripping the armrests tightly. "That was insane," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. "I've never flown like that before, never thought I'd have to." "You handled yourself well," Daniel said, his tone neutral but with a hint of approval. "Not many people could have pulled off something like that." Ethan looked at him, surprised by the compliment. "Thanks, I guess. But I wasn't exactly thinking about what I was doing, just trying not to die." Daniel gave a faint nod, his expression unreadable. "Survival is instinctive. You trusted your instincts and it paid off." Rachel joined them at the front of the shuttle, sitting in one of the empty seats. "What's our next move?" she asked, her voice low. "The Krillians will come back. They won't stop until they find us." "They won't give up easily," Daniel agreed, his gaze still fixed on the radar. "But we've bought ourselves some time. Right now our priority is reaching Earth. Once we're there, we can warn the fleet and prepare for whatever comes next." Ethan frowned, his brow furrowing with concern. "Do you really think they'll attack Earth? I mean, isn't this whole thing supposed to be about avoiding war?" "It was," Daniel replied, his tone grim. "But Vrax made his intentions clear. This wasn't just an ambush, it was a declaration. The Krillians don't want peace. They want domination. And if we don't stop them, they'll keep pushing until they get it." Rachel shivered at the thought, glancing back at the sleeping hostages. These people had been caught in the crossfire, innocent victims of a conflict they hadn't chosen. If the Krillians attacked Earth, countless others would suffer the same fate, or worse. "What about the others?" Ethan asked, gesturing toward the passengers. "Where do we take them? They can't exactly go back to their old lives after this." Daniel paused, considering the question. "We'll drop them off at the nearest human outpost. It's safer than sending them directly to Earth, especially since we don't know how close the Krillians are to breaching our borders. After that, we continue to Earth. We'll need reinforcements and answers." Ethan nodded slowly, though his expression remained troubled. "You think they'll believe us about what happened on the station?" "They'll have no choice," Rachel interjected, her voice firm. "We recorded everything. The ambush, the hostages, even the fight. There's proof. Earth needs to know what we're dealing with." Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small data chip, handing it to Rachel. "This contains footage of the entire mission. Make sure it gets transmitted to command the moment we reach the outpost. They need to see exactly what we're up against." Rachel took the chip carefully, nodding in understanding. "I'll make sure it gets done." For a while, the shuttle remained silent except for the faint hum of the engines. The passengers slept fitfully, their dreams haunted by the events of the past hours. Rachel watched them, her heart heavy with guilt. She had always believed in diplomacy, in finding peaceful solutions to conflicts, but now faced with the reality of the Krillians' aggression, she wasn't sure peace was possible anymore. "You okay?" Ethan asked, noticing her distant expression. Rachel forced a smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just thinking about everything." Ethan nodded sympathetically. "It's a lot to process, trust me, I get it." Before Rachel could respond, Daniel spoke up, his voice cutting through the quiet. "We're approaching the outpost. Prepare for landing." Everyone stirred, roused by the announcement. Rachel moved to wake the passengers, gently shaking them, awake and explaining where they were headed. Most of them seemed relieved at the prospect of safety, though some remained wary, unsure if they could ever truly feel secure again. The outpost appeared on the horizon, a small, domed structure perched on the surface of a barren moon. Its lights glowed faintly against the dark expanse of space, a beacon of hope for those seeking refuge. Ethan guided the shuttle toward the landing pad, his hands steady despite the lingering adrenaline in his system. As the shuttle touched down, the passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing to disembark. Rachel opened the hatch, allowing the cool air of the outpost to flow inside. A group of uniformed personnel greeted them, their expressions a mix of curiosity and concern. "Welcome to Outpost Delta 7, one of them said, stepping forward. "We received your distress signal. Are you injured?" "No injuries," Daniel replied, stepping off the shuttle. "But we're here to transfer these civilians. They've been through enough. Keep them safe." The officer nodded, motioning for the passengers to follow him. As they filed out, some of them stopped to thank Daniel and Rachel once more. The young woman who had spoken to Rachel earlier lingered for a moment, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said again, her voice breaking slightly, "for everything." Rachel smiled warmly, though her heart ached at the sight of their pain. "Take care of yourself," she said softly. "You're safe now." Once the passengers were gone, the three of them returned to the shuttle. The atmosphere inside felt heavier somehow, as if the absence of the hostages had left a void. Rachel sat down, clutching the data chip tightly in her hand. "What now?" she asked, looking at Daniel. "We head to Earth," Daniel replied, his tone resolute. "And we prepare for war." Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his messy hair. "War, that's a lot to wrap my head around." "It's the truth," Daniel said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. "The Krillians made their choice. Now we have to make ours." Rachel nodded silently, her mind racing with possibilities. War meant sacrifice, loss, and untold suffering. But it also meant standing up for humanity, for the right to live free, from fear and oppression. She glanced at Daniel, realizing how much he carried on his shoulders. Beneath his calm exterior lay a man burdened by duty, driven by a desire to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. As the shuttle lifted off once more, heading toward Earth, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only beginning. The Krillians had underestimated Daniel Carter, thinking him nothing more than a diplomat, but they had awakened something far more dangerous, something capable of changing the course of history and as the stars stretched endlessly, before them Rachel knew one thing for certain. Whatever came next, they would face it together.